Hello everybody, and welcome. Happy September. We have finally made it, and it is the biggest month of the year for thousands of residency candidates. And we are extremely excited to be able to dive into some of the most pertinent things that every applicant should be paying attention to, thinking about, and doing right now in September. My name is Zeph. I am the Chief Residency Advisor for Match a Resident. I have a background in public health and international human rights and have been a residency advisor for multiple years, first getting started with Match a Resident back in 2008, believe it or not. And so today we're going to be covering a few different topics. I hope everybody has a little bit of time to dive into some exciting updates and releases for Match a Resident, as well as advice and tips and input. We will be hosting a question and answer session towards the end of the live here today. So be sure to leave us questions and comments as we go along here. If you have questions about your heiress application or letters of recommendation, maybe an heiress photograph, we're going to be talking about a lot of those topics today. So like I said, questions and comments along the way. We're going to be sure to address as many questions as possible towards the end of the live. And I'm going to be joined here today with Tiffany. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hello.
Perfect. Awesome. So Tiffany, do you want to give a little introduction to yourself? I'm sure people are hopefully recognizing you at this point to some degree.
I do. I want to readjust really quickly. Give me just a second.
Sure.
Okay. That's a little better. Hello. So got the good volume. Yep, I'm Tiffany McPherson and joining Zeph today live with Match a Resident. I'm our Director of Communications. And you know, a lot of times I'm the person interacting with you guys when you're messaging with comments in the DMs and sending in questions. So today's going to be really awesome so that we can answer even more of those questions right here, right now. You don't have to wait.
Perfect. Yeah, we get, probably dozens, if not hundreds of questions sometimes in a given day. And so the more we're able to address some of those common questions for the community, the better. So today I just want to kind of dive in with some basics. Again, it is the beginning of September and, it's very exciting. Heiress just opened up and people are going to be, getting their applications in and applying to programs. And there's so much excitement happening right now, but I just want to start out with 5 quick tips to make sure that everybody's thinking about, paying attention to before we dive into some of the more nitty-gritty and some awesome updates that we have for you guys. So number 1, although September 1st has passed, please keep in mind that you do not need to certify and submit your heiress application today or tomorrow or the next day. You have all the way through the end of September 28th before September 29th to certify and submit your application. And you even have after the 29th. The 29th is not a deadline. So it's very important that you do not certify and submit your application until you are 100% sure that it's flawless, it's perfected, it's professional, that you haven't missed a section or that you misaddressed a section. So take your time right now. You don't need to rush to certify. Once you do, it gets locked in for the entire duration of the season. So keep that in mind. You have time. And then the second bit of advice, yeah, Tiffany, go for it.
So just on this topic, a question that I've had a lot recently is wondering, should I actually wait until the 27th, 28th, or the morning of the 29th? Because in previous years, there have been some system issues with the huge influx of people waiting all the way till the deadline. So do you think it's good to, like you said, take your time right now, but still aim for a little bit earlier than the actual cutoff?
Yeah, so nobody should be waiting until the night of the 28th to apply to 100 or 150 programs. The whole purpose of this window is that you have time, because it takes time to make document assignments for each program. You want to make sure you're not making a mistake, like assigning the wrong personal statement or the wrong LOR to a program, and just because you're trying to apply to so many programs so quickly, you actually forget or make a mistake. So what I'm saying is maybe wait a week or at least a few days. You know, you don't have to certify on the first, second, or third, but once you feel comfortable and confident in your heiress application, then you can certify and start, you know, applying to the most compatible programs for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that probably answers a lot of people's questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. So my number 2 piece of advice is to understand whether or not you should be filling out the supplemental heiress application. And we are going to be diving into the supplemental heiress application next Tuesday. So make sure you stay tuned for a more in-depth discussion of that. But briefly, if you're applying to dermatology, internal medicine, or categorical general surgery, you will have the opportunity to fill out the supplemental heiress application. And just to give everybody a little bit of insight, you know, in internal medicine, there are almost 400 programs choosing to participate in the supplemental heiress application. So although it's been claimed to be optional, just know that many programs are still intending on participating. And like I said, we're going to dive into that more next week. So stay tuned. Make sure you got your questions on lock and that you're starting to fill out that application if you will be applying to one of those 3 specialties. Now, my third bit of advice is that everybody needs to be in very good communication with their letter of recommendation authors, because believe it or not, one of the latest documents for so many people, and we get this every single year, is they thought they were going to apply on time, but they're missing a letter of recommendation because it took the LOR author a longer time to upload. It took ECFMG or heiress more time to process the LOR, the heiress in this case. But it is very important that you are in consistent communication with your LOR authors and you're giving them little, you know, reminders and any help that they might need to get your LORs submitted on time. So that's the third piece of advice, is to really make sure that you're in good communication with your LOR authors. And then the fourth piece of advice is really to make sure that your heiress application, again, and your personal statements and your letters of recommendation are crisp, they're appropriate, and they're professional. Now, if you have doubts as to whether or not your heiress application and supporting documents are going to make the cut, so to speak, or are they going to compete against the thousands of other applications out there, we definitely recommend getting second opinions on those from either advisors, mentors, or professionals. And so I would highly recommend that if you feel that your English is not your strongest suit, then having editing for your heiress application might be a great idea. And same with personal statements. And if you've been asked to write your own letters of recommendation, getting a second opinion or getting professional help with editing those can be very powerful. So the place to do that we would recommend is residencyexperts.com. And that's where we do provide editing and optimization for your heiress application and supporting documents, which is what is going to win you interviews. So that's very important to keep in mind. Now, my fifth piece of advice is, of course, to make sure that you are figuring out what are the best and most compatible residency programs for you to apply to. Now, there's many ways to do this, and a lot of people have a mixed approach, and we think that that's great. But keep in mind, if you're looking for all the most compatible programs for you, that's of course what Match Resident offers, is customized residency lists where we've done all the program research for you. We've collected the best of the best programs, and we have additional insights and tools and features to help make sure that you are actually applying to the top 100 or maybe 150, even 200 programs for you. So we're going to be diving into a little bit more detail about some releases that we just made as well. So we actually just launched MAR, Match Residence 3.0. And so that's very exciting for us. We have some features that we're going to start just sharing with you guys. If you haven't checked out the platform yet, definitely encourage you to do so. So I'm going to hand it off to Tiffany for a little bit, and maybe she can tell us a little bit more about MAR 3.0.
Sure, I can definitely do that. This is a really exciting release for us, MAR 3.0. You know, Match Residence platform was awesome before, but now it's just elevated to kind of the next level. What we did is we really thought about you guys and our users and how we could make the platform even more smooth and easy to use and really help you expedite that whole process of program research and getting ready to, get into ERIS and actually apply to the programs. So with that in mind, we made several different upgrades, I would say, to Match a Resident, and we're calling it MAR 3.0. So the first thing that I think is probably the coolest new tool is the funneled organizational system. So we're calling this FOS for short. And what it does is it allows you to really take your entire customized list, and then you can, I guess, funnel it is the right word. So you can take that list and look at the programs on it that you're most interested in, and then you can select saved. So you'll save or bookmark those programs for further consideration. So you're narrowing down your comprehensive customized list into the programs you're interested in. Next, you'll be thinking about the programs that you want to apply to. So you're going to further scrutinize all the programs on your saved list, and you can mark those that you choose or that you're intending to apply to as applying. So it funnels down your programs even further into the next level. So you'll have fewer and fewer programs as you are deciding where you will apply. Of course, there's a final step. Once you have selected the programs that you're applying to and you go ahead and make those applications, ideally you're going to be getting interviews in several of those programs. So the final step in the funneling system is that you can mark the programs as interviewing, and you can schedule the date of your interview right there in the platform. So that's another really awesome feature of MAR 3.0 is that it's comprehensively managing your entire application system. You don't have to have a separate calendar tool or an Excel sheet or anything like that. You can do everything from analyze your list to sort your list to schedule your interviews and even leave notes on the different programs that you're interested in. And of course, we have a variety of other tools once the season gets going, like Rank Assist, that allows you to think about those interviews that you had and rate them, the quality of the interview, what you liked, what you didn't like. So really, this is not just a right now program research website. What it is it's an entire application season system for you to use.
Can I try to summarize the funneled organizational system for everybody? And I think you give a really great explanation. And so just to exemplify it, let's say you have 350 programs on your customized list, and then you might save about, let's say, 200 of those programs as your top 200 programs. And then when it actually comes to application time, you mark 100 as the programs that you're applying to. And then of those 100 programs, let's say you got 15 interviews. And so we're creating this funnel to get those interviews, which are, of course, hopefully going to end up in a match for you. So that's a great explanation, Tiffany. And like Tiffany said, it integrates all aspects of your application process and cycle, like scheduling your interviews, analyzing your interviews after the season or after the interview is completed through the Rank Assist tool. Yeah, so I appreciate that comprehensiveness that it offers as well.
Yeah, I like that you added the visual, right? So we're starting here and definitely funneling down to that smaller list so it's manageable for you. So awesome. So there's a couple of other really great features that we offer within your customized program list. And I think another one of the best ones is the compatibility score. So it's one thing to be presented with a list of 300 programs that you are compatible with. It's another thing to know which of those programs are you most compatible with. So we do that work for you. And each of the programs that you're compatible with has a compatibility score that's shown with it, and that's out of 100. So a compatibility score of 100 means that you meet all of the program's minimum requirements and that you're a really great fit for that particular program. So you can then take a look at your list, and from top to bottom, it's organized from most compatible to less compatible. So it's important to notice that every program on your list is one that you are compatible with. It's just a matter of most compatible to less compatible. And depending on how big your list is, this is a really important tool because, as Zeph mentioned, 100 programs is really the recommendation for the minimum that you should be applying to. And you want to apply to the top 100 programs. As you start to get further down your list, of course, you might decide to maybe jump into program 110 that you like better than program 89 for its location or whatever reason. But it is important to take a look at that compatibility score to give you more insight into where you have the best chance of interviewing.
So I have a question. If I have a compatibility score of 100 on my list, does that mean I'm guaranteed an interview at that program?
Definitely not. So the compatibility score, no, it's a great question. It's one I get a lot. It's not meant to be a guarantee of anything. It's meant to tell you that without having to pull apart all the little pieces of the core criteria and compare yourself, we're letting you know that your criteria is well aligned with the program's requirements. So that means you have a better chance for an interview with a program that your compatibility score is 100 with than you would if the compatibility score was, say, 73.
Perfect. And is there a way to tell which programs have interviewed people like me before if I was applying?
There is. That's actually another feature that I wanted to talk about. So that's Interview Link. And what Interview Link is it's an icon that's going to appear on your customized program list. And it tells you, if you see that icon on a program, it tells you that a previous applicant from a previous season who had similar criteria as you received an interview with that particular program. So we can assume then if the program has interviewed someone just like you in terms of criteria, that there's a good chance that they would consider your application and consider inviting you for an interview as well. So it's just shedding a little bit more light on the program's compatibility.
Would it be better to focus on the interview link programs or the compatibility score for the programs when I'm trying to decide where I should apply?
Well, the answer is both. So if you're looking at programs that have high compatibility scores and interview link, those are going to be the strongest programs for you to consider applying to. And another feature within MAR 3.0 is our filters. So you can choose to filter programs by interview link so that you would only be seeing programs that are interview linked and also have your compatibility score. So then you could say, wow, this is really what my premier list of compatible programs.
Perfect. Yeah, and that brings up another point which I want to address, which is the ability to filter for different requirements through the additional filters. And something that we get a lot is whether or not an applicant should apply without ECFMG certification. And it's surprising that many people feel that they cannot apply without that certification, but that's simply not the case. We've found out that many programs do not require ECFMG certification at the time of application. They might require it maybe in order to get an interview, or a lot of them just require it by the rank order list submission. So that's another filter you can use to hide programs that require ECFMG certification at the time of application. So that's another filter. You can also hide programs that require passing certain exams on the first attempt and other abilities to help refine your customized list.
Yeah, and actually to speak to that question, because I would say that's my most commonly received question, not so much if I can apply without the ECFMG certification, but can I apply without my Step 2 CK score? And so the answer, as Zach said, is yes, you can apply without your Step 2 CK score. But the relationship there is that, of course, you need that Step 2 CK score to get your ECFMG certification. So if you're not going to have that score, you're not going to have the certification, you just turn on a filter and you're going to filter out programs that would not be a smart application decision for you until you have your ECFMG certification. So, and another important thing that I like to remind everybody of is once you do get your Step 2 CK score back, you need to reauthorize your USMLE transcripts so that the programs you applied to will then have access to your Step 2 score, because that's really important. You want to make sure that they know, like, okay, I've completed the test, I've got my score. You don't want to leave that blank throughout the duration of the season.
Perfect. And so in terms of the customized list, what other changes have we made for MAR 3.0?
Sure. So one more really cool addition that is brand new to MAR 3.0 is that you can now access all the latest residency and match news right up front. Excuse me. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and it did not listen to me. So you can right within the system, you can go right up to the top of your customized list, and there's a news button and there's a resource button. News is filtering in news from heiress, from the ECFMG, from the NRMP, right there. You don't have to go to another website. You don't have to search multiple websites. It's filtering it all right in within your customized program list. So you, like I said, you don't have to leave. Resources, on the other hand, is all of Matcha Residents' really amazing resources. We spend a lot of time putting together videos and blogs for you guys that talk about some of the more complicated and complex topics that we get common questions on. So you can just go right to resources and access all of our most popular resources for you right there.
Perfect. Yeah, and so it's really, again, our whole goal is to make it a comprehensive place to educate yourself about the match process, because that's the most important aspect, and to stay up to date with the most important news, because things are changing all the time. The ECFMG is making updates. The AAMC and supplemental heiress application requirements are changing on a day-to-day basis, and so it's very helpful to have that information right at your fingertips and part of the customized list. And another aspect that we've added is a completely new program profile. So instead of the previous program cards, we're able to actually share more information for every single program and to organize it in a more condensed way. And this year we've actually been asking extra questions when we're doing our program update to help give you guys more information. So for example, we've been asking whether or not programs consider telerotations as U.S. clinical experience. Because of COVID-19, many people had their in-person rotations canceled, and the only experiences they could get were virtual. And so we want to know, does that count towards your U.S. clinical experience requirement or preference? And so we've been asking, and that information is available for the programs that have been updated, which is the majority of programs in our list now. And another question we've been asking is the interview format. And the interesting thing is that, again, things are changing on a day-to-day basis. And many programs were maybe considering having both in-person and virtual, but the majority of programs are having virtual interviews again. And but that information is also found in a customized list. And some programs, they might be offering rounds of virtual interviews and then in-person visits for some of their top candidates. And so we leave that additional information as a comment for that requirement or that extra insight.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the last feature that I wanted to talk about is our highlights and insights section that's part of each program's profile. And Zach talked about a lot of the different things that we're including this year. I think the key one really is about telerotations and finding out if that's going to count as U.S. clinical experience, since that's an important requirement for a lot of programs. Another item that you can find in the highlights is how many letters of recommendation are required for each particular program. Some are 3 and some are 4, and you want to make sure that you're giving the right amount of letters of recommendation, not going over or under what the specific program is requiring. And with that, I know we were going to talk a little bit too about the importance of specialty-specific letters of recommendation, which is something I'll let Seth go ahead and start the conversation on.
Perfect. Yeah. So everybody knows that letters of recommendation are very important, but some people don't understand exactly how important they are, and the fact that they can sometimes make or break your application. And the perfect example of this is if you apply to a specialty with an LOR that's recommending you for a different specialty, you are basically sinking your application right there. And the whole point of the letters of recommendation is that they are helping paint a broader picture of you as an ideal candidate for that specific specialty. And so if you're applying to internal medicine, let's say you're applying to internal medicine and family medicine, make sure all your IM LORs are recommending you either for internal medicine or are just general letters of recommendation. For family medicine, make sure that they're recommending you specifically for family medicine. 1 to 2 of those must be specialty specific at a minimum typically. And then anything else has to be a general letter of recommendation. And so what we often recommend people to do is to actually ask for two versions of the letters of recommendation from their specific authors. One being the specialty specific LOR, and then one being either a general version or one that's acknowledging your interest in a different specialty. That's totally okay. You can have an internist write you one LOR for internal medicine, and then in the second LOR acknowledge and recommend you for family medicine. And that's totally fine, because the whole point is that you need to have a completely coherent application. So that means your personal statement is extremely specialty specific. Your letters of recommendation are either very specialty specific or are general. But there's not mixed messages from programs, because they understand that people have interest in multiple specialties, but they want to feel that you really want the specialty that they are a part of if they're going to interview you and work with you for the next 3 to 7 years. So it's very important to have a consistent message for programs. Is there anything you want to add to that, Tiffany?
I do just want to reiterate one point. So just to make it very clear, it is okay to have a family medicine physician write you a letter of recommendation for any specialty. It could be for anesthesiology, for general surgery, for psychology, as long as that letter writer, let's say they're a family physician, is acknowledging that they're recommending you for the specialty that you're applying to, and ideally trying to speak toward your strengths that are relevant to the specialty. That's completely okay. So if you're applying for general surgery, let's say as an example, you can have one letter from a general surgeon who is recommending you for general surgery, another from an internist recommending you for general surgery, and another from an anesthesiologist recommending you for general surgery. So the key is not who wrote the letter. The key is that they are acknowledging what you are applying for and focusing on the skills that are relevant to the specialty.
Right. And that being said, the more relevant the experience came from, the stronger that LOR is going to be. And obviously, US-based letters of recommendation are more ideal, and more recent letters of recommendation are preferable as well. We say about 1 to 2 years is sort of the max date you should have for a letter of recommendation.
Another question I do get a lot is about the dates on letters of recommendation. So let's say you applied last season and you didn't match, and you're going to be applying again this season. You can, in a situation like that, you could ask your letter writer to send you the letter updated with a new date. So you wouldn't want to do that with a letter that's 4 or 5 years old, because at that point your experience is kind of old. But if it's just something that's, say, 6 to 12 months old and you want to have a fresh date on it, you can go ahead and ask that letter writer if they're comfortable switching the date, just to show that they still hold the same opinion of you this season as they did last season.
Mm-hmm. I just want to remind everybody again, we are going to be answering any questions that you have. So make sure you're leaving questions or comments below, and we're going to be able to address any of your burning concerns right here for everybody to be able to hear and learn from and share from. So if you have questions, just a little friendly reminder to leave them as comments below. And so I believe we have one more key topic that we wanted to discuss today.
It's the heiress photographs.
Yes, and so this is a very interesting aspect of the application. And we actually do offer complimentary heiress photograph feedback and review through residencyexperts.com, which is again where we provide the editing and optimization services for the heiress application, as well as supporting documents like personal statements and letters of recommendation. And part of that heiress photograph review is basically telling you how strong the photograph is it appropriate, and is it something that you should use or basically retake. And so I just want to go over some of the most common weak points of the heiress photograph. And so I'm going to start by the worst. And the worst is just like if I took a photograph of myself right now, like selfie in front of a blank wall, and that's what I used. Don't use a selfie. Basically, I'll tell you what you should be aiming for, which is a professionally taken headshot. You need to pay someone, if you were able, the minimum fee for one, single headshot in business formal attire with a neutral professional background. So, don't take it with your white coat in front of a building, and don't take it with, clothing that's not completely professional and appropriate. And another aspect of it is to make sure that you stand out from the background. A lot of times we see, especially in photographs that are not taken by professionals, that the person just blends into the background. It's like, where does the person start? What's the background? It's like whitewashed. A lot of times people have an extremely white, bright background, and it's like blinding to look at. And, that doesn't actually look good either. So you want a neutral background that's going to help offset the person in the photograph and make them the most present aspect of the photograph. And of course, your appearance, not only being professional, but having at least the minimum air of friendliness is very helpful and encouraged. Because if your photograph looks like a mean mug, then people are going to say, I wonder if I want to work with that person for the next 3, 4, 5 or more years. And I'm not saying you have to put a artificial smile on, but imagine that you're interacting with a patient. What sort of energy do you want to bring to that interaction? Is it one of openness and positivity, or is it something where you're completely involved in yourself and you're not able to project an air of comfort and friendliness for the patient or the program? So those are some of the key points. Is there anything I missed in there, Tiffany?
I did want to ask, because it's a common question, what is think of the right phrase. So how much of your body should be showing? Let's say you can't afford to hire someone for a professional headshot and you've got to do it yourself. I know we want to make sure to not cut the top of our head off. We actually do see a lot of heiress photographs where it stops kind of right about here. So you want to make sure the top of your head's in it, but what about the rest of us?
Yeah, so according to heiress, it should be a full head and shoulders shot. So I'm trying to get into the frame a little bit, but right now, this would be appropriate. It's my full head and my upper torso. So you should not just cut it off at the neck. You should not cut off, right here on your forehead. So it should be your full head and shoulders. Some people do end up having a little bit more of their torso, which is fine. But, if it's getting down to your waist, then you're probably a little bit too far zoomed out, and you can probably crop the photograph. So yeah, having your head and full shoulders is the benchmark for the heiress photograph.
And I'll add in one more piece of just general professional advice. It is great to show your personality. So if you're a gentleman, you're going to wear a tie and you want to pick something that reflects who you are, that's great. For the ladies, if you're going to have some earrings or some jewelry or something, that can be great too. But you don't want to overdo it. So keep in mind the purpose of this photo is for the program directors to get a first view of you, and whether we like it or not, they're going to gather a first impression based off of looking at your application material and your photo. So you don't want to distract them with a silly hat or something really, really loud jewelry or something like that. Business professional is the way to go here so that you can make a really positive first impression. Applying for Match is very serious, and obviously medicine is a professional profession. So it is important to keep that in mind and err in the way of sophistication and business professional when you're getting ready for your photo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the way I would look at it is if 60 to 75% of heiress photographs are professional headshots, how does that make the other 25% look? And the truth is, it looks less professional if you're comparing it to those that are professionally taken. And they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, so you want yours to be sharp, in focus. You want the photograph to have a high quality feel to it. People might send their passport photograph, which is actually worse than a selfie. So, don't do that. And if you have to take it on your own, which we completely understand, try to have somebody else take it for you so that you can, get multiple shots, your arms are relaxed. Again, it's not a selfie, and you're able to get it as professional as possible. Try to have a neutral background again, and you'll be in good shape. So that's just a few tips for the heiress photograph, as well as, we've talked about letters of recommendation, all these fantastic updates to the Match a Resident specialty navigator and customized residency lists through MAR 3.0. Make sure you check those out. Talked about heiress application editing and optimization and personal statement editing through residencyexperts.com, which is where we provide the editing and optimization services. And we've also covered some 5 tips. And if you weren't there for the beginning of those 5 tips, you can check it out on YouTube, or you can watch this video on IGTV at a later point. But now I think we're ready to maybe dive into some questions. So I don't know, Tiffany, if you're able to maybe see if we have some questions that we can help address from everybody out there.
I think we have maybe a lot of questions. So let me scroll back. We need glasses for this part.
Right.
So let's see. Went back to the beginning, and we have lots of people joining, so I'm just scrolling through those first.
Yeah, feel free to keep dropping your questions. We're going to get to as many as we can, mostly those relevant to the topics we were discussing today. Keep in mind, we're going to be diving into the supplemental heiress application more next week, Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the same time relatively that this live started here today.
Okay, so here's our first question. It says, excuse me, says, what are considered as clinical experiences?
So my interpretation of that question is what counts as U.S. clinical experience, or the second interpretation could be how do I put a clinical experience in my heiress application? And I'll just answer both of those. So typically, U.S. clinical experience is anything that's considered hands-on, where you're actually helping with hands-on patient care. So that's not observerships, and that's not research. Typically, U.S. clinical experience just means that it's a hands-on, patient-centered setting. And that could be paid, or it could be unpaid, or you could even paid to have that experience. I mean, it's very common to pay like a tuition basically for rotations, but that is most certainly a hands-on U.S. clinical experience in most cases. And another great aspect of the Match Resident customized list is we ask about the U.S. clinical experience requirements, and we're able to define when the program coordinator tells us this, this, and this counts, and these do not count. So we have that as additional comments. For the heiress application, any clinical training experience, whether that's paid, unpaid, or you had to actually pay yourself, counts as a work experience. So even if you were an unpaid student going through a rotation, that is a clinical work experience in the heiress application. Volunteering at the kids center at a hospital is different. It's not a clinical rotation. It's not clinical work. You're working in the playroom on your own time for 2 hours a week. That's volunteerism. But clinical experiences, clinical training is considered a work experience in heiress.
I'll ask another common question that you can answer about this topic. If someone were to work as a medical assistant in a doctor's office, would that be considered clinical/work experience?
Yes, that would definitely be a work experience, especially if you're getting paid for the position. And if you're having hands-on patient interactions, that's also clinical experience.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. Say you are interested in cardiology or gastroenterology as a fellowship later on and applying for internal medicine residency. What should your LOR mention that? So if you're interested in specific subspecialties of internal medicine for fellowship, should your LOR mention that?
So it wouldn't hurt for the most part if you were to discuss that, because that's actually a common topic in personal statements as well, which is what are my visions and goals after residency, and residency isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning of your career. And so discussing the fact that, I'm hoping to pursue fellowship training. My areas of interest are, cardiology or endocrinology. Then discussing those things, it should not hurt your application. I think it's very appropriate, especially if it's written by someone who has experience in that field, who acknowledges your interest in that, furthering your education in that aspect, and the fact that they actually have credibility in that area and recommending you for internal medicine, and also acknowledging your future vision and goals, because the whole idea with your application is that each aspect should complement and integrate one another. So the LORs and the personal statements should feel connected and balanced, and they should reflect similar information.
Awesome. I think that's a really great answer. It's another common question too, so that's good. All right, another one here. What's the difference between hospital letterhead and clinic letterhead for the LOR?
Hospital letterhead and clinic letterhead. I would have to see what the context of that is to be able to differentiate. If I were to go off the top of my head on that one, a hospital is an institution, whereas the clinic would be potentially a smaller program. But I'd have to see the context of that question to give a more clear answer.
Yeah, and just in case, because it seems to me like maybe the question is asking about like, is one better than the other? Like, is it better to have your LOR on hospital letterhead versus clinic letterhead? What would your answer be to that, if that is the context?
Yeah, so every letter recommendation should be on the official institution letterhead for that organization. And the most important part is that you have it on that letterhead. It shouldn't just be a Word document that was typed up. So just make sure that you have the letterhead, and that's going to be the most important aspect of the letter of recommendation, and it should be the official institution letterhead from wherever the source is.
Awesome. Okay, next question is, I work at a rural community hospital as a medical technologist. I basically do all the tasks of a med tech, including blood draw. Is this considered a clinical experience?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. If you have hands-on clinical experience in the US in this setting, then it may or may not be counted. It's really dependent on the program. So if I were to say in your application, you would probably consider applying to those programs that prefer US clinical experience, or maybe they have lower durations for their requirements. But for programs that require a year of hands-on US clinical experience, they're more likely to be more strict about what that means to them. So there's not a perfect answer to that question, because at the end of the day, each program considers US clinical experience and hands-on patient care in their own way. And so I would say that it does count to some degree, and it will be considered more highly by different programs.
Perfect. Okay. Next question is, I had to take photos for the ECFMG application. Will this show up in the heiress application?
The ECFMG application, what I answer to that is, it's always best to check with the official services for questions directly related to them. And so for the ECFMG, I would verify with them. There is a place to upload your photograph through Oasis, through the ECFMG. So you should verify with them whether or not you have done that already.
And I think they wanted to know, will the photograph they've uploaded to the ECFMG application, will that automatically go through in the heiress application, or will they need a new photo?
Right, that's a question for ECFMG. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly how the ECFMG application works or what they do internally. So we get a lot of questions, to be honest, about the ECFMG and how basically their support process works. And our answer, unfortunately, is you have to ask them. We're not the ECFMG, so talking to them is the best way to ensure that you're doing everything that they're expecting you to, and doing it through the proper channels.
Okay. All right, so the next question is, does Canadian clinical experience count as US clinical experience?
Right. So US clinical experience and Canadian clinical experience are essentially considered the same thing. They're interchangeable. So for many programs, if you have, for the vast majority of programs, if you have Canadian clinical experience, they're considering you basically a US graduate. Of course, that's different if you need visas and things like that. But in terms of clinical experience, they're considering that equal to US clinical experience.
Okay. Okay, so next question. Does it matter if the hands-on USCE was at a hospital or a private clinic? And I think we've addressed that, but if you want to just reiterate.
Yeah, so the most important aspect is that it is a hands-on clinical experience. Every type of experience is going to be looked at differently. And if you're only, seeing 10 patients a day versus 30 patients a day in a more robust clinical setting, the strength of those experiences and the diversity in what you're actually doing is going to reflect in the overall quality or perception. But it's totally fine if you were working in a small clinic. Any experience is better than none.
Okay. Next question is, should a Caribbean medical student that did all their rotations in the US, should that be inexperienced, since it would be on the transcript too? So
perfect. So this is, I believe they're asking, should I include my rotations in the heiress application under work experiences? And my answer to this is typically, if you have a well-written MSPE as well as medical school transcript, it's really not necessary to repeat that information in the heiress application. Focus more on your extracurriculars, your volunteerism, the research, other work experiences that you may have had. And if you want to include maybe some of the top rotations you did, especially maybe in the 2 or 3 specialties that you're applying to, then that would be okay. But something to keep in mind is to not repeat information everywhere in your application. So you don't want to say what is already in the MSPE and the heiress work experiences, and you don't want to repeat your work experiences verbatim in your personal statements, things like that. So it should be a integration and balance of that information. So just make sure that it is present. Now, if you can't get an MSPE from your school, or you literally have no other research, work, or volunteer experiences to include, then it's slightly better to include those clerkships so you have something in the heiress application.
I think that's great answer to a very, very common question. So thank you for that one. Our next one is, with the letter writer's approval, is it okay to upload the waived LOR by the applicant?
So that is a question for the AAMC. You want to talk to them about their letter of recommendation portal. And my guess, to be honest, is that the student cannot upload a waived letter, because at that point it's not waived, clearly. So again, that's another question for the AAMC, because that is where the LOR portal is hosted through. But it's my understanding that a waived LOR has to be uploaded by the actual author in order for it to even be waived. But I would verify with them for that question.
Okay. So our next question is, should one apply for specialty programs that didn't do USCE in, like applying for OBGYN with USCE only in internal medicine?
So the tricky part about that is, where are your specialty specific letters of recommendation coming from? And if you don't have specialty specific letters of recommendation in that specialty, then it's going to be very hard to get interviews. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you would need 3 letters of recommendation from other relevant specialties that are recommending you for OBGYN. Basically, again, acknowledging the fact that this was a family medicine experience or a general surgery experience, and then really discussing the fact that you're interested in OBGYN, and even talking about some of the relevant skills that you developed through that experience in order to increase the strength of the recommendation for OBGYN. So that way, when a program reads it, they see that, okay, this person is truly interested. They're not just applying because, they felt like maybe I can get into OBGYN. They are truly interested. They took the time to get 3 specialty-specific LORs from various specialties. In your personal statement, you could have addressed, I was trying to get my OBGYN rotation, but because of COVID-19, I wasn't able to get that experience. I've been doing my best to gain clinical experience in these ways. And the rest of the personal statement is obviously talking about why you're interested in OBGYN and why you're qualified and your expectations for residency, your future vision and goals, etc. So it's not impossible to get in, but you really have to go the extra mile to make sure that it is clear that you are interested and qualified for that specialty.
So I want to just ask an add-on question to that. Since we do recommend applying to 100 programs in your top specialty, and then if you have a backup specialty, applying to an additional 50 programs, do you think that if you don't have a very strong application for that backup specialty, is it smarter to do 150 then in your primary specialty if you have a stronger application package for that field?
So you're saying 150 in the strongest specialty and none in the other one?
Sure. So let's say your backup specialty is OBGYN, but you have no OBG. You had maybe 1 rotation in medical school, and that's it. So you don't have the right letters. You don't have the, experience to list in your CV. Would it be smarter which way would be smarter?
Comes down to a couple things. And the first question is, what do you truly want? And how hard are you willing to try to make that happen? And what are your financial abilities? Because it has been your dream to pursue OBGYN, and you don't have the direct experience yet, then you have multiple options. I mean, one is to apply to 50, 75 or more programs with the things we discussed that I just talked about. The other one is to wait to apply until you have that clinical experience and you have those stronger LORs. And the third one is to just forego that desire or just apply to a very limited number of programs. And, basically for an IMG, if you're applying especially to harder to get into specialties, 50 is like a minimum. Applying to 25 or 30 programs is a waste of time for most people, especially if you don't have a strong application, because it's a numbers game. If you have a weak application in a specific specialty versus a stronger application in an easier specialty, your interview rates might be 10% here and it might be 1% here. So if you only applied to 50 programs in the 1% category, you might not get any interviews. So, there's no perfect answer. We get so many questions like this where there's trade-offs in every situation. Should I apply without my CK? I have a failure on step 1. I have a low step 1 and no CK yet. When should I apply? And, should I apply to this specialty in this case? And the truth is, in many of these circumstances, there's no perfect answer. And so typically what I recommend for people is to analyze the things I talked about. What do you truly want? How hard are you going to work to make it happen? And what are your financial resources to help facilitate that, even if you have to apply 2 years in a row? And then you have to weigh all the trade-offs and then make the best informed decision. And a lot of times that ends up being just a mixed approach.
Thanks. Like I said, I think that's another common question. So I imagine that helped out a lot of people watching too. And someone says, thank you. Lots of thank yous coming in, and you're welcome. Seth and I both are happy to answer everybody's questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's one about Match a Resident. So does the MAR portal show us if the step 2 score is required for interview considerations, since I will get my step 2 score the end of October? So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I can reiterate. So it's not so much that the step 2 score is required, it's that the step 2 score is something that you need to get your ECFMG certification. So you can apply without a step 2 score. So to answer the question, it's not a filter. However, the ECFMG certification that you do need for some programs is a filter that you can turn off and on.
Right. And many programs are still looking at the step 1 score as the first determining factor whether or not to open up your application. And so if you're considering whether or not to apply without CK, or when to apply or how to apply, there are a few things to consider. If you have attempts on step 1, then applying without your CK is a much higher risk, because programs don't necessarily have confidence in you that you're going to pass CK, and they're less likely to interview you until they have confirmed that that is a passing score. If you have a very low step 1 score, or there are a multitude of other red flags in your application, then it's worth considering whether or not you should wait to apply until you have that CK, especially if you're not going to have it for a while, or to apply early on September 29th, and then just hope you're going to get considered by some of those programs. Apply to the rest of the programs maybe that require ECFMG certification, or the more challenging programs to get into. Again, going for a mixed approach is what is often recommended. So applying to 70% of the programs at the beginning, and then maybe apply to 30% more when you get your CK score in, because each program is going to factor that differently, and there's no perfect answer. So just have to weigh those trade-offs and then make the best decision for you based on that information.
Okay. Taking a look at the next one. I had a gap of almost 2 years due to COVID. Should I address it in my personal statement? And I can answer that one about the personal statement. So it is the right place to address that kind of a gap. Your personal statement, although it is short, between 700 to 800 words at the absolute max, it is the perfect place for you to explain something that there's no other place for. There's not a place in your heiress CV to explain that, and if you don't secure an interview, then you've never got the opportunity to explain the gap. So yes, your personal statement should address any red flag, especially a 2-year gap. So that's a pretty significant gap. I had a question the other day, like, what is considered a long gap? And I would say anything that's going to be noted on your MSPE as a gap would be considered long. So if it was recognized by your school as being an official leave of absence and a gap in your training, then you would need to address that in your personal statement.
Yeah, and there's 2 places that you can talk about gaps in medical education specifically. There is a question in the heiress application which asks about gaps in medical education, and it's, for many people, it's sufficient to address that gap in that section. For example, if you had a leave of absence, medical leave, or if you just took time off to study for step 1, putting that information down in that section is fine. But for those that have extended gaps, then potentially bridging that and complementing with additional information in the personal statement would be helpful. And in this case, it sounds like maybe you graduated already and then you have this gap because of COVID, or maybe it was just in your clinical rotation. So there are multiple places and ways to address that gap for sure.
Okay. So our next question is, are the extracurriculars during medical school worth mentioning?
Yes. So especially if you had leadership roles in those extracurriculars, and also depending on the extracurricular, if you're talking about a academically oriented extracurricular, then it's more likely to be a valuable addition to your heiress application. Being part of the water polo club is not necessarily a great addition to your heiress application. If you were the president of the water polo club, yeah, okay, you can add that. But you really just want to consider, is this putting me in a better light, or is this helping create a more diverse and strong character for programs to understand through my heiress application? And so extracurriculars typically are very appropriate to include, depending on what they are and depending on your involvement in them.
And you can always include things like that too in the hobbies section, right?
Yeah, so the hobbies is another place for that, but you really want the hobbies to focus more so on things outside of medical school, outside of medicine in general. What do you do in your free time that's apart from all of those things? So, if you do spend a majority of your free time working with, social organizations and volunteerism because that is what you love, then that can definitely be a hobby. And it's totally okay to include that in the hobby section and maybe have another reference to some of your involvement in the heiress volunteer experiences. Yeah.
Okay, let's see what's up next. Says, I was navigating through Residency Explorer for the first time, but let's see. But I don't in the website if the program required step 1 first take pass score. How do I find out if this is a requirement for the program? So let me look at that again. I was navigating through Residency Explorer for the first time, but I think it says, but I don't understand if the program required step 1 on the first attempt. So that's a Residency Explorer question. Do you have any insight on that, Seth?
Well, I would say to check your master resident customized list to see if they require passing step 1 on the first attempt, because we get that information directly from the programs during our annual database update, and we ask if they have requirements for attempts on cutoffs. I can't speak to Residency Explorer specifically. If that's the only tool that this person is using, I would recommend them reaching out to Residency Explorer. But otherwise, minimum scores and cutoff on attempts are core criteria for every single program in customized lists. And that's another reason why they're so powerful, is because there's not missing information. We spend weeks and thousands of hours making calls every year so that we can get in-person requirements directly from the programs, and we can get complete requirements. So USMLE step 1 scores and cutoff on attempts are both things that you can see in the programs, and you can also filter by. So you can hide programs that require passing step 1 on the first attempt, which is a great way to just, again, refine your customized list to the best of the best programs for you.
Awesome.
Let's do a few more questions for this one.
Yeah, a couple more?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is, I didn't know that we could go back and apply to more programs later on.
Yes. So again, September 29th is not a deadline for most programs. Interestingly, and this is something somewhat surprising, but during our update this year, we found out that many programs are still having a deadline on October 1st, which is, and we clarify, you realize applications don't go out until the 29th. Is October 1st really your deadline? And they say yes. So that's another filter you can actually hide, is programs that have passed their application deadline. But you can still keep applying throughout the entire heiress window, basically throughout October, November, December, January. I mean, you can still be applying to programs. Many of those programs will have deadlines that have passed, or they have filled all their interview positions. So for those people who are applying late, you want to pay a special attention to program application deadlines, as well as just acknowledging that many programs have their interview positions filled up already.
Okay, I think that's a really good answer. And just if you have a customized residency program list, then you can, like Zach said, you can turn on that filter so that if you do need to apply later for whatever reason, you can filter out those programs that have passed the deadline. So that's an important consideration to make. So let's look at one or two more here. Step 1, pass fail. Which match cycle will it start to matter on?
So pass fail begins, what, January 26th, 2022? All right. Yeah, January 2022. And this is another thing that I personally find to be comically sad and confusing, which is that if you took step 1 before it went pass fail, it will still be reported as a 3-digit score. And if you took it after step one goes pass fail, it will be reported as pass fail. And this just doesn't make any sense to me and a lot of other people, because it puts people on an unequal playing field for no reason. And I just don't understand the reasoning behind it, but that's what it is right now. That may change in the future, but that's what the pass fail schedule is intended to be right now. And a lot of people have questions: should I take it before or after pass fail? The question is, are you going to score well or not? And if you're going to score well, take it before it goes pass fail. If you're worried about passing, or you're going to get maybe below 215, it might be safer to just take after it goes pass fail, so you just have that pass on the first attempt.
Yeah, and so it's important to note, like, so next season for match 22, 23, it's going to be a mixed bag of applicants, some who have pass fail and some who are still having numerical scores reported. And then as we move into further seasons, 23, 24, and beyond, the percentage of applicants applying with pass fail scores is going to be higher and higher. Of course, there'll still probably be a few applicants who have that numerical score if they're applying, for a second or third time. But ultimately, the significance of that 3-digit score will phase itself out. And the general school of thought seems to be that a lot of emphasis will then be placed on step 2, because that will be the only distinguishing number left to really be able to consider for programs.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a couple of years to go before we get to that point.
Right.
Okay, so let's take a look at one more question, and we'll follow up with the rest of the questions after the live is over. We will definitely not leave anything unaddressed for you guys, but we just want to do one more question before we wrap up today. So this one says, I'm going to apply for internal medicine, and the only research position I'm able to get is under a neonatologist. It's a good university. Should I go ahead with the research opportunity?
Yeah, so it's okay to have research experience in a field that you're not necessarily applying to. And the idea is that you want to stay clinically active and clinically relevant, whether that's through research or hands-on experience. And as long as there are other aspects of your application that are supporting your candidacy for the specific specialty you are going for, then you're going to be in a good position. And again, if you can get letters of recommendation for that specialty, and for those people who are writing the LORs from different fields or areas, acknowledging your interest for that specific specialty, like internal medicine, then you're going to be in good shape still. So it's okay. Don't think it's the end of the world if you have research in one field and you're trying to apply for another one, and especially something like internal medicine. If you're applying to plastic surgery or radiology, and you don't have any experience in those fields, and all of your research is in a completely different area, then that's going to look different. But if it's just 1 year of research, or maybe you'll even be able to get research in internal medicine specifically through your networking through the current research position. So it's not the end of the world, and it's definitely not going to be a detriment, especially if you can have other aspects of your application that support your candidacy for internal medicine.
All right, awesome. All right, I think we're gonna wrap up our session today. Does that sound good, Seth?
Yeah, that would be good. Just keep in mind, we're going to be back on here next week, Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be diving into the supplemental heiress application, and I'm sure everybody's going to have a lot of questions. So again, hit us up there. Make sure you ask questions. We'll be addressing them to the best of our abilities without, overstepping our knowledge or assumptions about this new application, which is, creating a lot of questions for not only applicants, but also program directors and review committees and official organizations as a whole. So make sure to come back next Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. And we definitely thank everybody for being here today. Thanks, Tiffany, for helping answer so many questions and share all about MAR 3.0 and the amazing updates that we just launched. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. Again, if you need help with heiress application editing and optimization, go to residencyexperts.com. We'll be happy to help refine and optimize all your application and supporting documents. And yeah, we're really grateful for everybody out there. We wish everybody the best of luck. Reach out if you have questions, comments, and we definitely are going to look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, sounds good. Yes, thank you, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.